Well, first of all, I feel very grateful to be able to be back home, and while I'm home, I want to make sure that I'm communicating with as many people as possible. So we're doing a number of things, visiting different parts of the district, having meetings with different elected officials. We're actually going to be meeting with ICE later in the week and try and actually and do a visit and check in on the people that are being held by ICE. And so I was planning to be here for 2 weeks, but we're going back on Monday. So I'll fly back to be there on Monday in case the Republicans have agreed to come to the table to have a discussion and a negotiation so we can keep the government open. So I'd love to be home. I much prefer to be at home in Oregon than in Washington, D.C., but I was elected to do a job, and keeping the government open is sort of one of the most basic things. So I sincerely hope that my colleagues can come to the table and negotiate in a way that does what's right for the American people.
Right, yeah, and other than just waiting for those Republicans to come to the table, who are you currently working with right now? What are some things that you're doing in D.C.?
Well, some of the things that we're doing in D.C. are number one, calling out the administration for the overreach and unconstitutional behavior, really, really egregious acts that are attempting to limit free speech, which is provided for in our Constitution, militarizing our streets with the National Guard. I mean, I have 10 to 12 National Guard members in front of my apartment where a number of members of Congress live. It is not a high crime area, and so really serious concerns about that. While at the same time, I'm also working on the surface transportation package. The Transportation Infrastructure Committee is a bipartisan committee, and so we're working to get priorities for the district to bring back to invest in bridges and roads, the Port of Coos Bay, which again, we've managed to keep that a priority in both Democratic and Republican administrations, working in the Natural Resources Committee on potential tribal co-management of our public lands, so we are not selling off our public lands. Also working in a bipartisan way on approaches to wildland firefighting and how do we get streamlined resources so that we can put fires out in fire season and make sure there's less to burn before fire season starts. So those are most of the things I'm working on. Unfortunately, my Republican colleagues have decided that they are not willing to take on their constitutional responsibility to do the work and be a check and a balance to the executive branch. For instance, they've handed away their authority to weigh in on tariffs. I mean, we're seeing whether it's the wine industry or manufacturers or, consumers, our farmers, consumers are seeing higher prices and our markets are being impacted. So really speaking up and telling the stories of Oregonians. My biggest concern now is how do we negotiate keeping the government open while also ensuring that the Affordable Care Act subsidies stay in place, because if our local people and people in America lose those subsidies, a lot of people are going to lose health care, rural hospitals will close, and healthcare becomes a hell of a lot less affordable for small business people and individuals who are self-employed.
I know that Oregon lost some substantial funds under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. I think it's $15 billion over the next couple of years with food and Medicaid. Is there anything in the current budget negotiations right now that might help potentially undo some of that, or is that still all up in the air?
Look, here's the thing. The Republicans in Congress, even though they have a 4-seat majority, they are governing like they have a mandate. That they have a mandate to not work with Democrats who represent half the country, right? We're very divided. They do not want Democrats at the table in the House. they are not even trying to get Democratic votes. So other than on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, and in that area is weirdly still functional, they're not having us at the table, so it's very, very hard to fight for that. I am working with some Republican colleagues and talking to them how our rural communities are going to be most impacted, and we've been able to get some movement there, but Oregon is going to be affected, and we have to look at what is the best way for us to utilize the money that we have and to figure out how, whether it's through the courts or, you know, through Congress or through our community speaking up, do we get our taxpayer dollars back to our state to do work for Oregonians?
You've been mentioning the fight that's happening over the funding bill. I know that Democrats are pushing for healthcare provisions, like you mentioned. Republicans want a clean stopgap. Given that President Trump this morning canceled a meeting with Democratic leaders in Congress, I'm wondering, do you believe that Democrats should hold firm on these demands, even if it risks a shutdown? And then in the event that there is a shutdown, what is your message for the Oregon residents that will see service interruptions or any other impacts of a shutdown government?
So the Republican Party, elections have consequences. The Republican Party holds every single lever of power. So whether it is in the legislative branch, the executive branch, or the Supreme Court, you have conservative majorities. And so to say, why are Democrats going to shut down government, I think is the wrong question. Why are Republicans going to allow this to happen when they are in charge? It is very easy. The things that are being asked for are something that across the board, right? Over 70% of Americans, Democrats and Republicans, support the Affordable Care Act subsidies, right? Support, for us it's the Oregon Health Plan, Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. These are not partisan things. So the ask for votes in the Senate for a continuing resolution is quite small, and it's quite popular. But Republicans aren't willing to do that, and then they want to point at Democrats saying, why are they shutting down government? I mean, that's some, you know, ace-level gaslighting right there. My message is I will hold out for what's right for my constituents, both Democrats and Republicans, rural and urban, and making sure that we have these healthcare subsidies is good for everyone. So I think it's a small ask, but again, I can only speak for the House. Republican leadership is not interested in being bipartisan at all. So I know that when Democrats were in control, we would get asked by the press, why aren't you being bipartisan? Where are those questions now? Why are they not being asked? With such a slim majority, why aren't you being bipartisan? And that's the question. Why are they willing to leave half the country behind?
You kind of mentioned this earlier, but specifically going into the controversy about how employers are responding to their employees' social media posts in the wake of the Charlie Kirk shooting. Do you think employers should be allowed to hold employees accountable for what they say about the assassination?
I think, first of all, everyone should denounce political violence. There is no excuse for political violence of any sort, of any kind, at any time. And we have freedom of speech, right? Now, that is not freedom to incite violence, but we have freedom of speech. And we have a president who literally called for one of his agencies, the FCC, to make sure Jimmy Kimmel was taken off the air for saying something negative about Charlie Kirk. Not reveling in an assassination, right? Not calling for violence like some of my colleagues have actually done since the Kirk assassination, but for saying something negative. This should be chilling. I was talking to a former Republican colleague from Eastern Oregon, and he is very conservative and a strict constitutionalist, and he said he thought incredibly well of Charlie Kirk, but he said, I am concerned with the lack of due process and with the infringement of our right to free speech. And we should all be afraid of that, especially for you in the media. So fundamentally, what people do in their private time can have impacts with employers, but my bigger concern as a member of Congress is that we protect the free speech that is provided for in the First Amendment of our Constitution.
Yeah, and you talked about, I believe it was about a month or two ago, about the Affordable Care Act being affected, and right now in our own community in Lane County, Pacific Source is a big provider of just healthcare for Medicaid members, and they're maybe pulling out, leaving about 90,000 Lane County residents without coverage. So can you speak to how that can be affected, how you guys can help fix that, anything like that?
Yeah, so this is more of a state and local issue for Pacific Source. There is still negotiations, although Pacific Source has said to Lane County, and this is the only county, that they are pulling out of Lane County, which leaves our Medicaid, Oregon Health Plan population without care. Then we go to an open card system until we get someone, and that means that that the state will have to pay higher reimbursement rates. People will have lack of service. It is very, very bad. I've talked with the governor's people this morning. Again, this is more of a state and local issue and how services are provided. I've spoken with the governor's people this morning. I've spoken with county commissioners yesterday, legislators yesterday, and I will continue to work on this today because we cannot let this happen. We cannot let them just leave right now. And so whatever issues there are, and there's always multiple sides to a story, we have to fix it because we cannot have the major Medicaid provider just leave without anything in its wake.
You mentioned that the healthcare subsidies were a must-have in any budget bill. Is there any other sort of must-haves that you would have to see before sort of voting to affirmative to continue funding? And maybe can you tell me a little bit more about those subsidies?
This is a continuing resolution for a short period of time, gets us through to November. So in any negotiation, right? I mean, elections have consequences. Republicans hold every single lever of power in all the branches of government. So a negotiation's a negotiation. This is a short-term continuing resolution. What we're asking for is both really important for the American people and a small ask. That is, again, very popular across the political spectrum. So I think this is a reasonable negotiation, a reasonable ask for a short-term continuing resolution. And I'm hopeful that my Republican colleagues will push their leadership to come to the table, because privately they'll tell me, I really want this. My constituents want this, but I'm afraid to speak out publicly against my leadership or Donald Trump.
Do you have any comment on concerns regarding COVID-19 vaccine availability from your constituents? I know our newsroom has been hearing a lot of concerns about that, given the West Coast Alliance and all this uncertainty that sort of follows.
Yeah, I've had a lot of outreach about COVID vaccines, about other vaccine availability, about the CDC and RFK Jr. Putting out junk science and actually going against scientifically proven medical data and recommendations. I am very, very proud that our state is part of the West Coast Alliance to say, how are we going to keep our people safe? There has been a shortage of the COVID vaccine, but we're starting to see that coming into availability. But I'm proud that the West Coast is going it alone, but many, many people are very concerned. It's ridiculous.
Have you heard of any, can you just elaborate on any more recent news that you've heard about expanding COVID availability in this area? Because there's been...
Yeah, when I've talked to people, at first we had a number of constituents reach out to say that they went to get a COVID vaccine and they couldn't get one at their local pharmacy, and then there was information. I mean, you can see it all over Next Door Neighbor or Facebook, right? about where vaccines are available. And again, we're starting to see that come through with that West Coast Alliance. And I think it's really important. We have to do what's right for the health and safety of our country, of our constituents. And if the federal government's not going to do it, then the state needs to step up. And I'm really grateful that the governors of Washington, Oregon, and California have shown that leadership.
Continuing on kind of with the health factor, the Trump administration announced yesterday that there could be a link between pregnant women taking Tylenol and autism. Many in the health industry say there's not enough evidence to support that claim. What is your reaction to this?
So I'm not a physician. However, scientists who have done the medical research and who are physicians do not feel like, they don't feel like the data is there to have made that pronouncement. So the other thing that happened was not only did they say there was a connection between Tylenol and autism, right, without the kind of peer-reviewed studies and research that you normally get, but they also recommended that a certain supplement that Mehmet Oz sells, distributes, right, would be the cure for autism. And again, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but that's why we need to do the studies that are transparent, that have sound scientific basis, that are peer-reviewed. And so it's concerning. Why, is this being done to put money in the pockets of somebody in the Trump administration? Or is this going to be just the first of many, junk science determinations that are going to make us less healthy?
Kind of a follow-up to that. I mean, like you said, there's a lot of information coming from a lot of different places, and it can be confusing for constituents to figure out where to go. What would you say to constituents that don't really know where to get that information, know who to trust within the government right now? What would you say to them?
So I would say go to your physician, right? Like go to your medical practitioner, because they are still are able to get the research, and they have the training. It is concerning that we have a federal government that is pulling solid research and recommendations away from doctors so that they're not getting the same advice. But I say go to your medical practitioner, and they're the ones that can give you the best advice. WebMD, Facebook, not the best place to go if you have a question about what's going to keep you most healthy when you're sick.
I wanted to ask about public lands. I know on Friday the public comment period closed for the rollback on the roadless rules.
Right.
And that's from the administrative side. Is there anything you're doing on the congressional side to try to maybe preserve those types of protections for public?
Yeah, absolutely. What we have done is we've sent a letter, we've requested, I've talked to the chair of my Natural Resources Committee, and again, we've contacted the administration to extend the public comment period. My concern is whether it's with the roadless rule, the Endangered Species Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, that the administration is wholesale just taking away protections that were long fought for. And if there are changes that need to be made, they should be done with input from the public based on science, and done changes made with a scalpel when the science determines that's the path that we should take, as opposed to just eliminating any protections, because we've seen here in Oregon what happens when we lose those protections, and we're not willing to go back there. So we are pushing very hard to extend the public comment period, and again, to not take that sledgehammer approach to just eliminating the protections, whether it's the roadless rule or any of the other natural resource protections.
Yeah, can you talk to me about the status of two acts you've been trying to get signed into law, the Southwestern Oregon Watershed and Salmon Protection Act and the Affordable Pricing for Taxpayer-Funded Prescription Drugs Act?
SAUSPA, the protection for the Smith River, and what it would be is a mining withdrawal, saying that down, by the Smith River, you should not be able to mine in this area where so many people in Northern California and Southern Oregon depend on this water for drinking, for recreating. We have a strong bipartisan contingent. So this is, again, a very conservative area, but the people in that area, Republicans, Democrats, they're fishermen, they recreate on the river, and again, this is their water supply. So we're pushing very hard to get bipartisan support, to have the Republican leaders down there contact the Republican leadership so that we can really work to get this one thing done if a lands package goes through. The best chance we had for that was if a lands package went through before, the start of the 119th session. That didn't happen, so we're pushing on that. Affordable prescription drugs, this is something that is bipartisan, and so trying to work with my colleagues to move that forward. But I mean, things are pretty broken right now in the federal government, and I have to say, just honestly, I work well with my colleagues across the political spectrum, but it was really difficult to look at colleagues who I'm co-sponsoring bills with who literally called for civil war, called me an enemy of the state, put my life and my family's life in danger, and say, hey, how do we move this bill forward? So I had to take a step back, and when I go back, I had a couple of really direct conversations, like saying, you can't come to me and ask for my help and support when you just literally called for my detention or murder. So I got a couple of apologies, but I don't know if it's going to happen again. So I'm going back Monday, and we'll just get up and try again.
If you'd be willing to elaborate, which members did you receive those apologies for? And then I have one more question for you on the environment.
I'm not gonna elaborate on that.
Okay. The EPA named the J.H. Baxter site Superfund site in
Yep.
July. I'm wondering, what are your expectations for that cleanup? And then do you have any response to concerns that the contamination has a larger footprint than previously believed?
So I represented West Eugene and Junction City in the legislature. I lived in West Eugene in that area. So this is something I've been following for a very long time. And the constituents there and a number of environmental activists worked very hard to make sure that cleanup, that was declared a Superfund site, right? That Baxter had to do the right thing, that they had to make it right. I have great concerns about whether or not the federal government is going to hold their end of the bargain to be able to give us the money to do what is right for these constituents, which is to clear out the areas that have been poisoned, right? To make it right for those communities, which are lower income communities. So we're tracking it. We're working with the administration. We're working with the local community in terms of, is it a larger footprint? Look, just to level set, I'm working on making sure that we get what was promised to us before we work to take that next step. I do actually feel pretty positive about it.
And you kept mentioning this potential government shutdown. What can you say to your constituents to kind of quell their concerns if that does indeed happen?
Look, the last time we had a government shutdown, we had food banks for our TSA agents who were forced to go to work. Nobody should want a government shutdown. And the fact of the matter is, where we are so closely divided, yes, Republicans have control of the House and the Senate, and that means they have the responsibility of leadership. So I will be making calls to my Republican colleagues, when I get back to DC, and asking them to please, for the good of the country, Do not shut down the government. You know, don't say it's my way or I'm taking my ball and going home. We are elected to lead, and they need to show some damn leadership. So what I would say is we're going to fight really hard to make sure government stays open, and it is a negotiation. You can't get something for nothing. They need Democratic votes, and the ask is very simple. It is small, and it is something Republicans and Democrats agree should happen. So again, if it shuts down, it is pure hubris, and again, Republicans not showing leadership and thinking of the best interests of the American people. So I'm going to fight to keep it open, and we need to get something for that vote, and it's a simple ask.
Obviously, 2025, there's been a lot of things that have been happening, especially in the government and just everyday lives. What would you say to, again, those constituents that are feeling tired, that are feeling, again, very disconnected from the government because of so many different things going on, so many back and forths? You know, how do you try to still keep people involved and show that, you know, they need to stay involved and see these concerns? So people are overwhelmed and people are afraid. Like, I have talked to people, again, throughout this district. I talk to people, my constituents, every single day. And I can't tell you the number of people, my neighbors, and I live in a rural community. I don't live in South Eugene, right? And they just say, I can't watch the news because I find it overwhelming. I'm checking out. But we have a voice and we can't check out. Now, we have to figure out how to get information in a way that makes sense, that's accurate, understanding that social media has an algorithm that is set up to keep people outraged and overwhelmed, right? To feed them information that already feeds into their predisposed beliefs, whether you're progressive or you're conservative. So what I say is go out, talk to your neighbors, focus on things that you can do, but right now is not the time to be silent. Whether it's the militarization of our cities, whether it's the lack of due process with ICE and what's happening with our immigrant communities, whether it's, you know, what's happening to our health care, whether it's what's happening when Americans, we have the president of this country who has said, I don't want my enemies to do well, right? Like literally pitting one American against another. We have to take a step back and work to make sure that we're connecting as people. But it is overwhelming. People do feel powerless. And what I would say is don't lose hope, take care of yourself, find a way to get information that is, you know, not set to keep you outraged, and talk to your neighbors.
Eugene and Springfield residents have both voiced concerns about license plate reader technology.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, do you believe that this technology violates privacy rights?
I have great concerns about the flock cameras, specifically in what is done. So what I can say is the way the federal government and ICE and Homeland Security is using access to people's private information should terrify everybody. You know, if you are someone that cares about privacy rights, what is happening at the federal level is unconscionable, right? And also, I believe, yeah, it's unconscionable. So the flock cameras, I have concerns about what is happening with the information that is picked up by these flock cameras. And I think that whether it's the ACLU or members of our immigrant or trans community, they're justifiable in their right to be concerned about how this information is being used. So where it is a local issue, but we're keeping apprised of it and talking with people in the community, both at the city level and then community activists as well.
So have you or any of your staff specifically consulted the Eugene or Springfield city councils to discuss how this happened?
Yeah, I've had many conversations with both the mayor of Springfield and Eugene city councilors.
You mentioned coming here specifically to Eugene, you've been talking with ICE, people contained by ICE. There's been a lot of protests here in Eugene, obviously, against ICE, and I just want to hear, again, what you're doing here and who you're talking to specifically, what are the conversations that you're having, and what can you tell the people that are obviously concerned with ICE being here in Eugene?
So, first of all, this is personal, right? I'm a second generation American married to an immigrant. So, you know, I'm a member of Congress and I'm concerned. And I can only imagine how people feel. People feel powerless and people feel afraid. You know, we have an administration and a Department of Homeland Security and ICE who are hiring people who show up in unmarked cars, who are grabbing people off the street, who are not identifying themselves, again, not allowing due process, picking people up simply because of the color of their skin. So this is both racist and unconstitutional. I want to be able to go in and talk to some of the people who ICE is holding to find out if they're having access to their attorneys, making sure they know that as their congresswoman that we're willing to make sure that they have the right to due process because that is provided for in the Constitution. People are afraid, and rightfully so. So it's something on our website, we have pinned right at the top, Know Your Rights, for immigrants to know what their rights are. Because they're picking up people who are American citizens, right? They're picking up people who have green cards. They're picking up people who are here on visas legally. So this isn't about just picking up criminals. This is about terrorizing people who happen to be brown, right? They're terrorizing people who happen to be speaking out against the government. So I think that right now there's not anything more important that we be focusing on, because if you say, well, I'm going to let this portion of the population not have their right to due process or, you know, have their civil rights violated because, well, it's them, it's just a matter of time till it's you. So I think we've got to draw a line in the sand, and there are a lot of people that are stepping up and speaking out and protesting. I believe in peaceful protests. I do not support violence, but we absolutely have to speak out, and we cannot let this stand.
I don't know if we have time for one more question. But,
Sure.
I know that, you know, for transportation funds for Oregon, I know your office every year will announce a couple of projects. And I know some over the last 6 to 9 months have gotten complicated because the federal Department of Transportation is using this criteria about birth rates and marriage rates, and
Right.
it's confused at least one project in Veneta I know of.
Yes.
So when you kind of allocate these funds and do that work, I guess what concerns do you have about this process, and has anything changed since those announcements?
When Sean Duffy, who's the director of the Department of Transportation, came in front of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, I asked him specifically that, look, we have grants that have been awarded, right? We have the power of the purse in the legislature as Congress. And now these grants are being held up for things that have nothing to do with the transportation grant, like marriage and birth rates. Part of the reason that we want to invest in our rural communities is so that we can bring jobs back. You can't have high marriage and birth rates if kids have to leave and go to Portland to find a job, right? And that is exactly what I asked him. And he said, well, you know, we're looking at these things on a case-to-case basis. So when we're able to go in on a case-by-case basis, we've been able to have a number of these grants restored, whether it's through the courts or it's through, you know, making the case to the administration or to the Department of Transportation. We've actually managed to have a good working relationship with the Department of Transportation.
You described the current environment in Congress as broken. Obviously, there are fears that I think a lot of people have about where our country is going. And you talked specifically about Republicans' leadership and how they need to step up to the plate. Who do you view as the leader of the Democratic Party right now? And especially for constituents that are thinking about midterms approaching with concerns about who's going to step up and represent their party, what would you say?
What I would say is we've got a group of us that are focused, and it's everyone from Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez, who's one of the most conservative Democrats, to Greg Kazar, who heads up the Progressive Caucus, Chris DeLuzio, Pat Ryan, myself, probably about 35 to 40 members who are focusing on economic populism, right? Like the fact that the reason Donald Trump won the election, the reason Zoran Mamdani won the election, is that they were talking about the fact that the system isn't working for people. And they talked about economics, about jobs, about the fact that people can't afford, to buy a home, to pay for daycare, to pay for gas. And I feel like for too long, the Democratic Party has, brought a white paper to a gunfight, right? Like, let me write you a 60-page dissertation about poverty when people just really want to be able to afford food. So there are a lot of us, whether it's, Bernie or AOC, or like I said, Chris DeLuzio, Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez, there's who are really focused on just fighting for working people. For me, the leaders that I've always gone to and the ones that people trust are union leaders and people in the labor movement. What we saw over the last election was that people don't trust politicians or their political leaders, but they trust their union. And even if they're not union members, they trust the word of a union to be able to fight for working people. So that's where I'm looking to. Those are the people that I'm working with. I mean, we can talk about who should be the leader. J.B. Pritzker is doing amazing things. Mitch Landrieu out of Louisiana has put together a weekly Substack called the Working Class Project, really talking about how did Democrats lose the working class and what are these people saying. Gavin Newsom is standing up. So we've got a lot of people across the country, and I think for me, I'm just going to focus on what I've always done, which is fighting for the people that matter, and those are the people that feel left behind. And again, it's the working class. And until the leadership in the Democratic Party focuses on that, I think it's going to be hard for people to say, I don't want to vote for Republicans, but we've got to give them something to vote for. And I think what we need to give people to vote for is rebuilding the middle class. Absolutely needs to be focused on that.
So are you suggesting that leadership in the House maybe should include more of a focus on, in terms of any other names that come to mind? I'm not sure if you're...
What I focus on every day is making sure life's better for the majority of people that I represent who, just want a better shot. So there are lots of names, there are lots of people. The ones that I see that are doing the work that are sort of the shining stars right now are, J.B. Pritzker, are Gavin Newsom, are the work that Mitch Landrieu is doing, the work that Bernie and AOC are doing, going out into conservative areas and having 75,000 people come because they are talking about what matters to working people. And that's the only way that we're going to win. I wish we didn't have just a two-party system, but we have what we have. So again, for me, I think it's the labor movement that moves us forward, and that's how I got into politics, and that's what I'll continue to follow.
Thank you.
And right now, where do you see Oregon's labor movement?
I don't know. We are one of the most strongly unionized states. My biggest concern is that when you pull money out of infrastructure, those are good jobs with good wages and good benefits. So we want to make sure that we're continuing to have those jobs and apprenticeship opportunities. Very concerned with what's happening to our universities, our community colleges, where young people are getting trained specifically for the 50% of jobs that need more than a high school degree, less than a college degree. So I think we need to think about jobs, the economy, and housing, and again, ensuring that everyone that took an oath to obey and uphold the Constitution, which is our Congress and our President, keep doing so. All right.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.